Professor Ethan Katsh, thank you for coming on this documentary, Can ODR Change the World? The Story and Promise of Online Dispute Resolution. I'm honored to have some of your time today where we can talk a little bit about this passion of yours that has spanned decades and educate the public about what ODR is and the history of it and the future of it as well. So let's start from the very beginning. Can you start us off with the initial thoughts you had about ODR? Where did the seeds come from to inspire the idea that conflict could be resolved without disputing parties having to be in the same physical space?
All right, well, let's talk about a couple of decades very quickly. But the beginning for my interest in technology was in law school, where there was no technology except television, no computers in the building, no access to online sources. Um, but it was a time in which cable television was starting, and there was some questions about how it should be regulated. There's still questions about how content of TV should be regulated. And it seemed that this technology was going to influence law. So when I got a position teaching at the University of Massachusetts, I was fortunate to have colleagues who were not interested in the kind of subject matter that was common in law school, namely legal doctrine, but were interested in the role of law in society. And it was easy to move from interest in television to a concern of what impact television is having on the thinking of public thinking about law. And I wrote a piece about television coverage of the Supreme Court. And at some point in the late 70s, early 80s, a colleague introduced me to Marshall McLuhan, who had written as famously, "The medium is the message." And what was that message? McLuhan is a bit out of favor, but the basic germ of the idea, which wasn't really totally original with him, was that it's not the content of television that has its impact on the public, but rather the changes in which we interact with technology, in this case, television. And that occupied me for a good part of the late 70s, early 80s. And in the early 80s, of course, the personal computer became widespread. And that was eye-opening to see, being able to see on the screen what had been fixed on paper. And that was the kind of change I think McLuhan was referring to, that we're not looking at the content of what's on the screen, but we're looking at the fact that the screen changes how we talk about things, how we write about things, how we think about the law. And the first book I wrote, The Electronic Media and the Transformation of Law, was really based on that idea that if you look at the law, you can find ways in which technology is changing how we practice law, how we think about law, but not necessarily legal doctrine. The first lawyers who were interested in computers were interested in access to law. So Lexis, currently still existing online legal service, retrieval service, came into vogue at the early, mid-1980s. And it generated a handful of people in the law school environment, in the law and legal studies environment, who were interested in the role of technology, the role that technology could play. And there were very few of them, because law schools were not sympathetic to the idea of doing things outside of the library. The print library was the basic center of almost every law school. And the law library was an elaborate place, elaborate not only in its architecture, but in elaborate and complicated and detailed in how one looked up the law. And all of a sudden, you could look up the law sitting either in a library or eventually at home. And the point being that this seemed to be a monumental change. And when you think about the impact of technology on law, going back to late 80s, the question was what one could see that all kinds of things were in the process of change. And the book Electronic Media and Transformation of Law was moving from a print environment where everything is contained in a book, everything is linear, everything is uniform, to an online environment where those things were not as secure as they had once been. So I was fortunate to be teaching in an environment which was sympathetic to looking at these things. And at, after publication of my book, I came in contact with several other people in the law school environment or legal practice environment who were sympathetic to the same ideas. And I think out of my interactions with those people, some in Chicago, some at Cornell, um, most influential, a practicing lawyer in D.C. named David Johnson, um, enabled me to think more and more about this technology. And chapter 2 of the book deals with conflict, because if you change the way in which people relate to each other and do it in a novel way, some things are going to break down. And the idea was that even with networks, instant communication, relationships change, transactions change, and we should be looking into those things.
And could I pause you to ask you one question? I have the book in my hand, The Electronic Media and the Transformation of Law. Would you say that this chapter, Law, Media, and Conflict, in your book, and here it is, would you say that that is probably the first reference at that time where the idea of conflict and technology was being pulled together?
I don't want to presume that I was the first, but yes, I'm sure there were others, but this was something I wrote about, and it attracted some attention. And it was timely because in the early 90s, there was incredible interest in the online environment, in the internet. And the, what transpired or what evolved in the online world very quickly was conflict. Strange people, bad people, interested people, all kinds of people were using the internet for novel things. And a significant event in the early 90s was previously the internet had been regulated. There was no commercial activity allowed online. Well, not by not permitting commercial activity, you didn't have pornography, you didn't have e-commerce disputes. That all changed in 1992 when the government opened up the internet to commercial activity. The internet actually was started in 1969, and for 25 years there were, you could probably count a handful of disputes, some involving instances of pornography, some involving some faculty members fighting with each other. But um, everything changed in the early 20th century and early 1990s when you and I could contact people, interact with people anywhere for any purpose. And e-commerce disputes started. So that goes to about 1995 when eBay started. Google started around the same time. Amazon started around the same time. All of these commercial entities started around the same time. Many of them still exist and have profited. But it was the internet bubble. Internet bubble meaning a lot of failures, but a lot of successes as well. A lot of creative people started focusing on the internet. And gradually it became clear that this was not going to be a harmonious environment. So there were all kinds of conflicts, intellectual property conflicts, free speech conflicts. Um, and at some point, someday in the mid 1990s, I got a phone call asking me if I would be interested in mediating some e-commerce disputes. There was a online auction house, not eBay, but an online auction house that was started by four University of Cincinnati law students. And they were pretty successful. So they were bought by eBay in the mid 1990s. And eBay didn't know what to do with them. I think this is my recollection at least, their general counsel suggests, why don't you see if we can do something about the disputes that are gradually growing or rapidly growing online, because these disputes are interfering with business. Disputes are not necessarily bad. They can generate creative thinking, but too many disputes are not good. And eBay was gradually discovering what it had never thought about before, which was that if you open up these online auction sites, you're going to find that um, people start fighting about things break. Um, and anytime something broke or didn't get delivered, the seller or buyer started thinking the worst. It wasn't simply that an accident occurred, but it was something intentional. So eBay was the perfect environment. It was referred to as the perfect storm, but there's a book written about eBay called The Perfect Store. And the book is about success on e-commerce, but devotes some time to how the idea of using technology to resolve these disputes, online disputes, came about. So there was a lot of growth, a lot of experimentation, a lot of internet startups. One called Square Trade was reasonably successful with eBay, sellers and buyers and sellers. But none of these startups really became profitable. And Colin, as you know, was hired in the early 2000s by eBay to try to do something about online disputes, and he did this for 10 years and was totally successful in building systems that could handle these disputes.
So as you start, going into the e-commerce, eBay, Square Trade, your involvement in this is connected to UMass, University of Massachusetts Amherst. I had a chance to go there recently. So can you take us back to the early or mid 90s when you were at UMass Amherst? What was going on there from a academic perspective where when eBay and Square Trade, when these companies were reaching out to you, what were they looking for you to help address? And I'd just like you to talk about it because I just got a chance to go there yesterday, and I had visited with the current director of NCTDR.
Well, a basic thing was that UMass was a environment that encouraged experimentation. It was clear that it was an interesting place, an active place. Um, they weren't focused on the internet any more than other large universities were. The big question was, how are we going to interact with students online, and what creative students are going to misuse the internet. Um, but I was told by someone in charge of the computer systems in the early 90s that the web was just a passing fad. The web, please remember, was invented in around 1989. So all these things were going on at the same time. And UMass was supportive, but not really engaged directly in these activities. I think the main international change came in the mid-1990s with the conference held in D.C. about online dispute resolution. It was around that time that the phrase was coined. I'm not sure when exactly that was. I keep being asked when the phrase online dispute resolution, or ODR, came into being. My memory fails me with that one.
Yes, I know in Colin's recording he does discuss when that phrase came about, and so I'd have to go back and confirm what he had said. But tell us about that 1996 NCAIR conference in DC. First off, what is NCAIR, and why were you guys having it? And what was the context of that? People who were not around.
NCARE was a foundation, private foundation. NCARE means the National Center for Automated Information Research. That doesn't communicate very clearly what it was, but at the time it was providing grants to law schools to adapt technology to their work. And even at that time, technology in law schools was limited to libraries. If you wanted to access Lexis, you had to go to the library. There were a few computers there. They hadn't hadn't reached the classroom yet. But a forward-thinking, practicing lawyer in D.C., who I mentioned earlier, David Johnson, was involved with NCARE, and I had interacted with him before about these things, and he organized that meeting. And the meeting was designed to provide funding, $50,000, to three experiments. One was a family law project at the University of Maryland. One was called the Virtual Magistrate Project at Villanova Law School. And the third was a grant to UMass for what we were calling at the time the Online Ombuds Office. And the goal was to see if these projects could feasibly resolve disputes online. And the behind the scenes effort was to engage America Online, AOL, which was the big internet service provider at the time, to negotiate a series of disputes with them. Unfortunately, they didn't carry through with what they had promised. And Virtual Magistrate ended up resolving one dispute. The Maryland people, I didn't know if they resolved any disputes, and we resolved a few disputes online. But the papers that were delivered at the time are still accessible somewhere online. And that was a major event because it alerted law professors and practicing lawyers that this is something they should be paying attention to. And that led shortly thereafter, 2 or 3 years later, to our project with eBay, which resolved about 200 disputes in a 2-week period, which was by far the most disputes ever resolved online. 200 seemed like an overwhelming number. Uh, but when Square Trade started, or after a few years of working with eBay, Square Trade resolved 1 million disputes. And Colin came on board and eBay resolved, by the time he left, 60 million disputes. And that number is probably a lot higher today than it was then.
So, one of the catalysts I've discovered, both in talking to you now and in reading some of the other literature in this, is the OOO, the Online Ombuds Office. Was that the pilot program that eBay saw was active and they reached out to, that then segued to you guys assisting them?
I'm not sure. At some point, as I mentioned earlier, these 4 Cincinnati law school students just called me up. Where they got the idea, I don't know, but it was a phone call that ultimately changed my life.
Yeah.
And I think changed uh, how online dispute resolution gradually developed. Of course, we'll talk about this in a minute or two, probably, but nothing changed ODR as much as the pandemic.
Yeah. Yes, we'll get there. So, can you explain the dual parallels of the genesis, development, and growth of the internet and ODR?
Well, I think the idea was that transactions and relationships generate disputes. Maybe 1% of the time, maybe 5% of the time. In real life, if we establish a relationship with somebody, that may work out fine, but some percentage of relationships will break down. Some percentage of transactions will break down. And what the internet did was enable people to form relationships online and conduct transactions online. And when you do that at a large scale, you can't resolve those face to face. You need systems. And basically, that's ODR grew in parallel, in some respects, not exactly, but in parallel to growth of the internet. Um, Internet bubble, a lot of failures of internet startups, and some of those internet startups were ODR startups, and uh, they didn't succeed, but eventually they didn't die out either.
In those years, due to the lack of internet activity and thus online conflict in those early years, did you ever feel that you were probably trying to solve a problem that didn't yet exist? I'm trying to capture why you believe so strongly to do this work when people around you were probably wondering, look, you're chasing, windmills.
Well, I don't think that captures it very fairly.
Mhm.
There was understanding that transactions and relationships lead to disputes. There was a community of people. We started having Cyber Week in 1997, which was a week devoted to online conversations about ODR, about resolving conflict. We started having an international forum on ODR in 2002. And there was interest from the UN Economic Commission for Europe to hold a meeting, and we've been holding those meetings for the last 25 years. But what there wasn't, where your ass- assessment is accurate, is where there was not much interest was in the organized dispute resolution community. This persisted for many years. So there was a tension between people in ODR and people in typical mediators and arbitrators who felt strongly, felt as it was a fundamental part of their personalities that they had to meet face to face. You couldn't mediate disputes without being face to face. And as you know, that radically changed with the pandemic, ironically.
So, can you speak about the concept of conflict as a growth industry? It's something you've mentioned a lot. I believe it came from How to Get to Yes or Getting to Yes. Do you think your prediction that technology generates more disputes than it resolves is prophetic, especially regarding social media and the conflicts we see there?
Well, Getting to Yes was published in 1981. Um, so I have used it many times since then. I think it's the basic idea that is applicable in many ways. But I mean, it's worth thinking historically a little bit. The ADR environment only developed in the 1970s. The government saw that courts could not handle all the cases that were being presented to it, and a variety of people, including my colleague Janet Rifkin, who worked with me, um, were engaged in seeing how courts could handle more cases. And one of the ways in which they could handle more cases was by mediating, by having non-lawyers handle cases, mediating and arbitrating them. Well, that worked for, it still works, but we're at a point where it's not really working very well because new technology is going to generate more disputes. So conflict is a growth industry. Yeah, conflict is a growth industry as a result of new technological environments. So um, AI is the new environment, and I have no proof, but except that I believe strongly that new technological environments, new forms of relationships, new transactions. I say that over and over again, but it's the basic source of disputing, and AI changes all of it. So we're not seeing, at this date, I don't think we're seeing huge numbers of disputes, huge in the meaning millions or billions, but I think we will. And of course, we'll need to figure out new systems for dealing with that. So my point is, if it wasn't clear, these things happen sequentially. You have courts, you have parties. Parties grow in number due to a variety of things. You get new systems, ADR mainly. Then you get new systems to deal with the overflow from ADR, which is ODR. And gradually, I guess, it's fair to say that everything becomes ODR. That's how I feel.
And the second part of that question was, do you think, how do you see that in the context of social media and algorithms? Because that part of technology creates a whole lot of conflicts, probably more than anything else.
Yes, I think it's consistent with what we just were talking about. Nobody envisioned social networks, not the scale we have them today. And I think the social networks are struggling with this issue. still not handling it very successfully, but they recognize that they have to deal with it ongoing basis because these social networks are really antisocial networks. Um, we only read about the social networks, but um, again, I'm saying this over and over again. They're supposed to be social networks in establishing relationships, but from the earliest days, it was clear that these relationships break down. They're not relationships like that we consider successful or relational or long term. And there are so many of them, and they're cross border. So every innovation, you know, eBay and PayPal started out selling things only in the United States, and it was easy in the sense that you had a currency that could be put online. PayPal developed, and systems grew. But what about the rest of the world? How are they going to integrate into the PayPal, eBay environment? How are they going to sell things online? And at the beginning, they couldn't. I don't know if you can see behind me two vases.
I see them.
I was intrigued by how people pay for things online if they're in different countries. And in the early 2000s, I went to Romania for something. I decided to buy something there and find out how they sell things because people were selling things. They just couldn't do it above board. And people started selling things. You know, relatives who were going to the United States would carry them and pay for them here. They were innovative in how they would pay for things. So they were minor industries, but some countries were totally banned from participating on PayPal at that time. Gradually, that's changed, but it was, all of these things generate disputes.
So before we move on to some of the concepts like the fourth party, um, is there anything else that you'd like to share to kind of wrap up this segment on your involvement with e-commerce early on, specifically with eBay and SquareTrade?
No, for me, it was a learning experience. Um, the eBay experiment was just turned out fortuitously to be an ideal case study, even though it was involved only a relatively small number of disputes, 200. Square Trade was also an enormously educational involvement because they had people who were just incredibly smart and had been to Harvard Business School and were familiar with the environment. It was the late 90s. You could get money for almost anything. That's an exaggeration, but it seemed that way. So they were able to raise money, and they were successful up to a point, where it didn't seem like they were going to be profitable in the dispute resolution business. Um, they pivoted and became interested in consumer warranties, and I think we've been quite successful with doing that, but I haven't had anything to do with that.
So in his recording, Daniel Rainey spoke about the fourth party, crediting your 2001 book for it. So what is the fourth party? And if you could try to be as descriptive as possible, both from the perspective of what you were imagining back then in 2001 or and before, and how the concept of the fourth party has evolved. Because from Leia um, Wing, I understand now we're discussing a fifth party, i.e., the developers who are developing ODR. And so, can you just give us your thoughts about the fourth party? And I'll give you a copy of your book if you could hold it up for the camera. Yes, and so that was, in my opinion, probably the first major work published in the U.S. anyway that talked about um, ODR. So tell us, where does that idea come from about the fourth party?
The idea came, I remember it clearly. I'm just sitting at my computer typing and thinking, and some reason I thought this is like the fourth party.
Hmm.
This is not clearly, of course, what the fourth party would be, but thinking this is catchy enough phrase to change a few minds about what it is. And the fourth party, of course, we have the three parties. Fourth party is the technology that interacts somehow with the other parties, interacts with the process. But sometimes I think I write books and write things, and they're permanent, but I don't deal with them much after I've written them. And the fourth party somehow stayed alive for 2 decades at least. But all of a sudden, even after the pandemic, all of a sudden, the idea of the fourth party and conversations about the fourth party have become more frequent. So there's a book that just came out called Digital Dispute Resolution Design. That's a heavy title. But it's dispute systems design, as you may know, is a serious topic of writing and conversation in the mediation community and arbitration communities. But what happens when you involve technology in designing dispute systems or dispute prevention systems? And the authors of that book go into detail about their vision of the fourth party.
Yeah.
So I would take a look at that. It's available online.
Yes.
And they go on the whole chapter devoted to the fourth party. But in some respects, the fourth party is what you make of it. It's open to. I threw out the idea with some thoughts about what the idea meant, but it's been transformed in some ways by recent writing. The Journal of Negotiation had a piece in which Colin and Leah both contributed, which is also about the fourth party and AI. I mean, the fourth party could be, an AI system,
Yes.
which handles disputes all by itself, or it could be an assistant of some kind.
Mhm.
It's not very clear.
Thank you for that. And can you reshare the concepts and the anthropologist Edward Hall and Japanese hotel metaphor? It's something I read in your works as it relates to ODR. I'm trying to be descriptive, and you may recall the story. Anthropologist goes to Japan. He goes to his hotel room where he had been staying. He realizes all his stuff's gone. He goes to the front desk. Where's my stuff? Oh, it was placed in a new room. He goes to the new room, and everything was placed exactly as it had been before. So it's the same, but he feels it's different because he's in a new space, a new environment. I found that fascinating as I think about these ideas in ODR. Can you just go into that a little bit and why you had thought that up?
Well, I don't remember it. Honestly, I don't remember it that clearly. I
Yeah.
obviously do remember it. It was at the end, I think, of my second book, Law in a Digital World. And the story appealed to me. But I think a basic idea underlying all my work, actually, is that we're in a new space. And it's a space that looks similar but it's really radically different. And in that respect, I think the whole it's a nice story. It's he tells it better than I could or others could, but um, it encouraged me to think, and maybe encouraged you to think that what does it mean to be in this new space? And that's an I thought. Yeah, what does this new space consist of? That underlies all of my work.
Can you expand on ODR's development in the global space? Just you're at liberty to talk about the international component because you've seen the rise of, you've explained Romania, for example, and what happens when then a dispute happens eventually where eBay is working, letting vases be bought from San Francisco to Romania. What happens when a dispute occurs across the ocean?
Well, the same systems eBay has, I assume, can be work with registered users who are in different countries. Um, but it's more of a challenge. The European Union at some point tried to set up its own ODR system. I don't think it was particularly successful. You have to have a successful ODR system. You need the technology, you need the infrastructure, you need the people. Um, is this going to be a system that's handled all online or partially online? Um, so it becomes a much more difficult challenge than systems limited to a single country. And but the ideas and efforts to do something internationally remain, and Leah may have told you, there's now a new international standard for ODR, which is a significant achievement
Yes.
and probably forms the basis for a lot of interesting work.
Can you speak to the future of ODR and AI?
A little bit. Um, I start with the notion that conflict is a growth industry. It's a growth industry because change in technology, it forces us to understand what AI is. And AI introduces a very great level of complexity to our environment. We don't see this complexity because AI tries to hide it. But if you think about how more complex it is to to establish an AI system over a software system, a simple software system, it's a level of complexity that is astonishing. Um, you can create things using it. And if you create things using it, sometimes things go wrong. So I think AI is a tremendous challenge for the ODR community. It was looked at as a miracle, and then over time, people saw that it made mistakes. Well, every AI system is going to make mistakes. They may fix them afterwards, but the more complexity you add to a system, more likely it is that it will make mistakes. And mistakes are, I think, I might be wrong about this, but I think inevitable with every AI system, whether it's standalone AI judges or more complicated systems. So, what does that mean for AI? It means AI is here. And not AI is here, ODR is here. Um,
What do you think the future holds in terms of ODR, just based on your predictions? You said the phrase a second ago, I might be wrong. I wonder what predictions you made in the past that have not come to fruition, and then what predictions you have now that you guess may happen one day.
Well, I think we're going to have AI judges deciding disputes. Um, Somebody threw out that idea in the 1980s.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, it didn't go very far in the 1980s, but I give them credit for thinking of the idea. Um, I'm disappointed over time that the ADR community took so long to recognize the value of ODR, although I did, to my surprise, receive an award in 2017
Yeah, delivered.
from the
Yep,
ABA,
yep. I saw that.
which I thought was very nice, but didn't change any behaviors. Again, until the pandemic came along and people realized pretty quickly that they couldn't meet face to face anymore and that you could meet online and it would work nearly as well or just as well.
Yes. So, can you speak to the pandemic and what it meant? I'd like to kind of get your mindset in 2020. What were you thinking when you realized the lockdowns were here and people are now going to start actually putting this into practice that you had been spending so many years preparing for? What were your thoughts in 2020?
Well, my thought was amazement about Zoom. Zoom existed for a number of years before that, and I never paid much attention to it. Skype had existed for a number of years and was useful for communicating overseas, but never seemed to be relevant to ADR. Looking back on it, I think it's just honestly disappointing that it took a pandemic to generate understanding of what we had been talking about for 20 years. But that's the way it fell, and something good came out of the pandemic, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, of course, a lot of disputes came about out of the pandemic as well.
Yeah. Um, do you think a reason why it took so long to adopt was because the ideas in your books are theoretical to such a degree that it was just hard for mediators to conceptualize the need for it until they had to. They had no choice.
That's reasonable to think. A less complimentary way of thinking is that uh, technology was just a threat to the traditional practice of ADR.
Yeah.
And there was not clear, even at some point, in the early 2000s, no mediators didn't understand what technology could do at all. But gradually over time, as I've said, ODR wasn't developed for mediators. Mediators started using technology. They started using cell phones. They started using online resources. Uh, so by the 2020s, technology wasn't alien to mediators. They just limited its use to certain areas. And that fell apart with the pandemic.
Yes. Um, I'm curious, did you feel a sort of vindication?
Yes, of course.
Can you speak to us about conflict prevention?
Yes. Well, again, going back for a second to this flow of technology, starting with courts, ADR, ODR, each of those systems have been used to handle more and more disputes. uh, prevention is more efficient than resolution. Um, and I think the whole area of dispute system design, and particularly digital dispute system design, focuses on prevention more than resolution. In the first volume of dispute system design, they focus mostly on designing systems for face-to-face meetings. I think prevention was useful in that context, uh, but prevention is inevitable in dispute design, digital dispute design systems, because, again, numbers of disputes are going to increase radically. We should be thinking about how to prevent them. So I think prevention, resolution was the big idea of ADR. Prevention's the big idea of ODR.
What has kept you up at night about ODR? And do you have concerns about the future?
I have great concerns about the future because there's more technology to misuse than there used to be. There are more transactions and relationships. I say that over and over again. But those are the sources of disputes. And there are more and more, non-physical AI transactions and relationships formed. I mean, we can see the development of ChatGPT and the Google systems as they're generating all kinds of disputes for academia, educational institutions. So it keeps me up at night.
Okay. And just a couple more questions. For all the early and recent work you've done in this field, what do you believe your legacy will be when the history books are written about this subject?
Well, thanks to Colin primarily, I'm generally thought of as the originator of ODR. I used to try to tell him to stop saying that, but he never would and never will. And I say it's a little exaggerated because Colin was there at the beginning. He used to live in the next town to where we're talking, and we used to have lunch, once a month or so, just to talk about these things. So, I'm getting credit more than I deserve to be credit for. Of course, this book, if you look at chapter 2, you'll find a line in there. I can give you the page number later
Mm.
of where there's some mention that computer systems will be used to resolve cases.
Mm.
But Colin started a company in late 2000s. So I'd say anybody who was involved with ODR in the 1990s,
Yeah, that was onlineresolution.com, I believe.
yes, that
Yeah.
was his. But even the people involved, the people who organized the 1996 meeting in D.C., which had about 100 people there, all of them get some credit for affecting my thinking, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Colin made the comment about standing on the shoulders of giants who had come before him. And what do you think about that statement?
I think that goes as a statement by Isaac Newton.
Hmm.
And Newton was minimizing his own role
Hmm.
and saying that I don't think I'm anywhere near a giant, but I've had some influence that's persisted. So I suppose at some point I thought this will just fade away, die away,
Wow.
but it hasn't. The idea that I started this will at some point be forgotten. I have no doubt about that. As more pressing issues and more new systems develop. So we don't even know what will AI dispute resolution be called AI dispute resolution, or will it just be ODR? Personally, I think all dispute resolution will be ODR because all of it will use technology in some way, and we have enormous pressure on us to figure out how to use AI in a positive way.
Yes. So, final question, which is a question I ask everybody at the end. So, do you believe ODR can change the world? And Leah's focus was that it had already done so. So, but do you believe ODR can change the world? If so, how?
Well, I don't think ODR alone can change the world. There's room for the legal system to try to change the world. If you look back at, I talked about McLuhan. If you look back at the impact of print, it changed the world. Um, we wouldn't have a free press if we didn't have a press. We wouldn't have copyright law if there weren't the capabilities for copying things, on and on. So technology changes the world. ODR itself, no, but ODR in collaboration with AI systems hopefully will change the world. And I'm not sure we can hope for anything more than that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.